stall, would you?
Well, in 1952, I was a play in Paris. In 1952, there were no black people effectively speaking in London, in England for that matter. They began to come in after 1955. And this is an extraordinary event for me because it's the black community, West Indian community of London, which is claimed the play.
What is wonderful is coming into the theatre and finding black people here at last, because they never come to the theatre otherwise.
Well, to tell you the truth, I've often wondered why white people come to the theatre. There's very little in the theatre speaking to anybody.
Do you look at the play and wonder, do you want to change it? Do you feel it's relevant still?
I certainly wouldn't change it. In any case, the question is not whether it's relevant to me. It is certainly relevant to the people who have claimed it, the people who are playing it, the people who are interpreting it, who are making it theirs. I wasn't, after all, 35 years ago, there was no guarantee that I would be alive now.
So you might as well be dead, you say.
I might as well be dead, yes.
It's about blind faith. Margaret, the heroine, just takes on faith, doesn't she?
Well, she takes on faith as a way of avoiding something else. Many people do that. Perhaps most people do that. In order to avoid confronting love, and love involves the terrors of life, and that involves the terrors of death. And faith is, for many people, a kind of hiding place in which you won't be hurt, in which you won't have to think about yourself, and in which you won't have to change, in which you haven't got to be responsible for your neighbor.
Why do you think your father became a preacher?
My father was the son of a slave, which has something to do with it. He was a very strong-willed, very powerful, passionate, proud man. And for a man like that, in the South of those years, to speak only of the South of those years, a man like that was menaced from every conceivable angle. He was a walking phallic symbol. He was the culmination of the nightmare white people have in their heads when they talk about the nigger. And he had to become a saint in order to become a man.
You mean to remove himself?
To remove himself from the world's absolutely merciless judgment.
Then why, at 14, did you become a preacher?
In a peculiar way, though, I was 14 years old. I couldn't possibly have said it to myself that way. But my father's motives had something to do with my own, certainly. I wasn't as big as my father. I wasn't as visible, but I was very much like him. I was very proud and very difficult to handle. I, too, was a bad nigger. And a bad nigger, until today, let's face it, in the Western world, for the most part, a free black cat is looked on as a bad nigger, and he's in danger. And that was one of the reasons I entered the church, so I didn't put it that way to myself.
But where Margaret flies away from, in a sense, flees away from her sexuality, her sexual responsibility, in a sense, right? Do you think at 14 you were beginning to fear yours?
Oh, I think that must certainly be so, you know. It was incoherent. Adolescence is an incoherent time.
Right.
But certainly that had something to do with it. But it wasn't conscious. That became conscious when I began to be aware that as I stayed in the pulpit, as I began, against my will, perhaps, to learn more and more about my congregations and how little I could really console them, or I was much too young to give them any kind of wisdom. And I was learning more and more about myself. And I began to see, in a sense, I was hiding in the pulpit. And if I kept on doing that, I would become a liar. Lie to my congregations, lie to myself. And whatever faith, whatever possibility of faith and love there might be in my life, I would have destroyed. So I left.
More people are turning to religion at the moment.
More people are turning to a hiding place. It's not the same thing at all.
Right. What is this? Well, you mean there is no such thing as religion, or are you saying?
Well, religion, I think, I take my cue from from Jesus Christ, really, who told me and told all of us to love each other, clothe the naked, feed the hungry, and visit those in prison. And if you can't do that, you're not a believer. I don't care what church you go to.
And the world can't be behaving as though it's religious.
No, the world
You're saying.
The world is full of blasphemies.
But I wonder why there are born-again Christians then in large
Because
numbers.
they're panic-stricken. Because they don't know what to do with this century. They don't know what to do with what they made of the world. They don't know what to do with the choices they made. Look at the world, the Christian world.
Are you as frightened by the world as you were when you were a child?
I'm not frightened of anything anymore.
You were? You were?
I was. I was terrified. Well, terror can have one or two effects. You know, if you've got any sense, you realize that you better not run. Ain't no place to run, so you walk toward it. At least that way you'll know what hit you.
Terror was because you were a black, right?
Terror was not because I was black. It was because I was despised.
By the whites.
Yes.
As a black, right. Now, but one thing that recurs in a lot of your writing is a feeling of this person, James Baldwin, feeling lonely.
Oh,
Now,
that's universal.
And right, that's not to do with colour, is
No,
it?
nothing at all.
That's born, like, I interviewed somebody recently, a woman who said, loneliness is when I had a recurring dream, and I still have it, of being in the world with nobody else in sight, no living thing, no grass, no tree, just me.
The song says...
And it's terrified her all her life.
Well, we have a song which says, images down in the valley where I couldn't hear nobody pray. That's also where you find the strength or whatever it is, the grace to move from that desolation.
When you moved from America to France, as a young man with not much hope of much of a living, were you fleeing for company? Were you fleeing from loneliness, from terror? What were you doing?
Well, the truth about that is my baby sister, whom I named, was born the day her father died. And in my own mind, I was in effect her father. But I had worked for the army, I'd worked for the post office, I'd worked for all kinds of people for quite a long time by that time. And I knew I could not survive the post office for 17 years, which I thought would be the time that she would need to be able to take care of herself. I'd be 36, and assuming I'd survive with the post office, which was very unlikely, it'd be too late to start. So I had no choice but to jump. You know, it was when all my eggs, as you say, were in one basket. I had to become a writer or perish. And so I jumped.
But you left her.
I had to leave her in order to
survive.
Well, in order not to betray her, I had to leave.
When you
write the book.
When you went to France, you were saying, as a writer, were you not, that you were not going to write as a Negro writer, as a Negro man. You wanted to be a man, a writer, taking what you knew to other people, find out where it connects with other people.
Exactly.
Yeah. Was it easier to do in France than anywhere else?
Well, it was easier. I'm not sure if that's ever easy, but it was easier in France because at least there I was released from the hostile eyes of white Americans. I was released. You see, the worst thing about that is that first the world calls you a nigger, and imperceptibly you begin to call yourself a nigger. You begin to react that way. You begin to confirm the world's judgment. And that was beginning to happen to me in New York. I was so touchy that I was like a spring. I began to invent insults and danger. I realized that I was doing it to myself. And so I had to get away and find out who I was, not what I was, but who. And since I was up the French, very, well, if you're not French in France, you simply don't exist. And I was invisible in France, and that was what I needed.
But when you went to France, what amused me in one of your essays, I think I read it, was you, in order to find out who you were, you actually took a typewriter and some Bessie Smith records.
That's right.
To remind you who you were. What did that mean?
I didn't do that.
Why the Bessie?
I didn't do that consciously. I was I've been very sick, and a friend of mine carried me off to the hills in the mountains of Switzerland to bring me back to I was very ill. And I carried the 2 records with me in the typewriter because I was working on Mountain. I've been working on Mountain for that time for almost 10 years. And it's true, in that chalet in the snow, I listened to Bessie Smith and to Fats Waller, and they carried me back to what I myself had been like when I was a little boy, and gave me the key to the language which gave me Go Tell It on the Mountain.
We were in the theatre watching you play last week, and I noticed something which I think is the tricky thing about, let's leave aside the very big issue of race for a second. The race in quite a small everyday way I'm going to discuss with you for a second. This chap, right, he looked intelligent, he looked well off, he looked liberal. And since there were a lot of blacks and whites in the theatre that night, there was a black family, and their baby started first of all to gurgle, then to sort of laugh out loud, then to make a noise, then to cry, then to bawl. And he turned around, because it was a quiet part of the play, to say something. And then he saw that they were a black family. And he slowly turned around like that, because he couldn't actually say, tell them off, like he would of a white family.
Oh, that means you will tell them off in another way, in a worse way. The only interesting question about that anecdote is why the black man or the black family thought they should bring the baby to the theater.
Yes, I wondered that too.
Well, I know why.
Why?
It's the same reason that people took me to see, let's say Marian Anderson when I was very young. Same reason I took my sister to see Paul Robeson when she was very young. I know why. Black people need witnesses in this hostile world which thinks everything is white. That's why I brought his baby to the theater.
What is a little comfort blanket? His
no,
comfort.
No.
His
no,
what?
no,
What? What?
Something. The child will not remember he was there, but something in the child will register that.
I see. I do see what you mean. But I do think, however, to go back to this point I'm making, that it is extremely difficult, isn't it, when there are racial prejudices around?
Why don't you examine what the word racial means? After all, everybody's a race of one kind or another. We're not talking about racial prejudice. We're talking about the structure of power. The structure of power which has the right and the duty to tell other people who they are for very dubious reasons. After all, one of the reasons I'm black is because I had to be black in order to justify my slavery. That's part of my inheritance and part of yours too. It's got nothing to do with race. It's a way of avoiding history.
When, in another of your essays, you had a mother say that her words to you were, I wonder sometimes what makes white folk so mean. Why? Why?
Well, that was a mother talking about her son, who was was the only student, black student, in a white class in Little Rock 30 years ago during the school integration crisis. And he was going through hell in that school, from not only from the students, but from all the other white people too. And yes, she was a real wonder. What in the world do you see when you look at my son to make you treat him that way? No one has done anything to you.
But why then do you think it is?
I really think that, though it may sound a little strange, I think that the hardest thing for any human being to do is to forgive somebody they know they've wronged.
So that white people live with a guilt?
White people live in generality, as far as I can tell, live with a nightmare of the nigger they've invented. They have to have the nigger to justify the crime.
Do you think...
So they don't see the person.
Do you think that people ever get rid of prejudices? Do you think they just let them...
It is not a matter of prejudice. It is a matter of cowardice. It is easy to blame the nigger or the Arab or the Jew or the dyke or the faggot. Anyone who isn't you. You don't want to see that you could be that person, that in some way you are that person. What we call racial prejudice is a matter of the most abject cowardice.
It's cowardly, all right, that's for certain. But I mean, what is it that makes people frightened? Because to be a coward is to be frightened.
But what you see in other people, whatever you see in other people, is what you see in your mirror. And what you try to do is isolate whatever it is you see in that other person, which is you. Everybody knows, for example, if you listen, every writer knows. If you listen to me or I listen to you, no matter what I may be describing, I'm describing myself.
There's a prejudice that at one time was against homosexuals.
At one time.
Yeah, hold on. When it was a criminal offence, even. Then that's got removed.
The law.
And people started to appear to accept. Back it comes again now because of AIDS.
It never went anywhere. It never went anywhere. People's attitudes don't change because the law changes. I know that. And the homosexual questions like this is like what we call a racial question. Nobody, no man and no woman, is precisely what they think they are. Love is where you find it. And you don't know where it will carry you. And it is a terrifying thing, love. It is the only human possibility, but it's terrifying. And a man can fall in love with a man, a woman can fall in love with a woman. There's nothing anybody can do about it. It's not in the province of the law. There's nothing you do with the church. And if you lie about that, you lie about everything. And no one has a right to try to tell another human being whom he or she can or should love.
But when you wrote Giovanni's Room a long time ago, that was quite a brave book to bring out, wasn't it? It was about love, but it was about homosexual love, but it was about love. But you deliberately put in homosexual love, presumably.
Well, the boy is in the middle. It's not so much about homosexuality at all. It's about what happens to you if you can't love anybody. It doesn't make any difference whether you can't love a woman, can't love a man. If you can't love anybody, you're dangerous. Because you have no way of learning humility. No way of learning that other people suffer. And no way of learning how to use your suffering and theirs to get from one place to another. In short, you fail the human responsibility, which is to love each other.
Are you still in despair about the world?
I never have been in despair about the world. I'm enraged by it.
Enraged, all right.
But I don't think I'm in despair. I can't afford despair. I can't tell my nephew, my niece, you can't tell the children there's no hope.
I suppose I'm wondering whether we're more materialistic, more selfish.
I don't know more.
No.
I think that we're more panic-stricken. I think that I walk through these cities, the cities of the Western world, London, New York, and sometimes it resembles the most poverty-stricken cities of the East. There's been a breakdown, a betrayal of the social contract in Western life. And people are grabbing for things and holding on to what they think they can get and stepping all over their neighbors because they are panic-stricken.
What, comforting themselves with material things?
Yes, but when people do that, they are reacting to something is beginning to crack. People hoard all this because they don't have anything else, but they don't really believe in it, and they kill to get it. But that proves the moral bankruptcy, which translates itself into the actual bankruptcy of the world in which we live. We have yet to understand that if I am starving, you are in danger. When people think that my danger makes them safe, they're in trouble. It is clear to me, it's clear to many, that what we call the political vocabulary of this age cannot serve the needs of this age. That we will have to find a way to get beyond our crippling habits. This is not the 19th century. Queen Victoria is long, long dead, and Europe is no longer the center of the world.
Well, thank you for being the center of my world for a while
Thank
today.
you.
James Baldwin.
Thank you very much.
James Baldwin, who died on Monday. We showed that programme again instead of our Build interview with Sir Alec Guinness, which you will be able to see next Wednesday. I'll be back on Friday. In the meantime, good afternoon.